My story begins as far as sex trafficking goes at quite a young age. My sister was born with a abnormality in her eyes, and she needed surgery. And so my parents decided that I would earn the money for my sister's surgery by participating at the ripe old age of 3.5 in kiddie porn. My name is Carrie. I'm here because, in my opinion, education is the first line of defense against predators who are perpetuating human sex trafficking. And I believe that knowledge is power. And I also believe that our stories make a difference, and that by telling our stories, it can have an impact on a person way more than facts or figures could. And that's why I do what I do. You have to have an emotional connection. You have to have an emotional reason to join in this fight, because it's hard work. It's devastating work. And if you don't have a motivation beyond a cerebral level, then you're not going to be able to stick with it and stay in the fight and keep pouring into these women and men who need help. Nowadays, kiddie porn is so on the rise because people can do it in bedrooms and basements all over the world with nothing but their phones. But this was a planned production. This is way back in the day. There was actually a film, there was actually a camera and a setup and everything. This wasn't filmed on somebody's phone or a camcorder. I don't have any problem dating myself. I'm 51 years old. And so this was way before all of that technology existed. It was a much more of it had to be planned. It was organized. There were people there. I was very young. So among my first memories were leading up to the event, and then the day of, and then what happened that day. Those are pretty much my first memories. So I don't know of an existence, and there's never been a time in my life where I wasn't trafficked, as far as I can remember. There's nothing typical about my childhood, my life. I was broken on such a biological, neurological level, and so very, very young. I didn't develop the way kids are supposed to develop. I had PTSD and CPTSD before I could even, knew all of those letters to string together. So, I definitely always felt different from everyone around me, kind of separated, as if I actually was an ugly duckling growing up in a world full of swans. I just felt different and awkward and could not relate to people my own age, could not ever just be in the moment. I was always hypervigilant, afraid. I was an insomniac from the time I was 8. Still am, actually. And so I never had any sort of normal developmental milestones, normal developmental problems. And most people, most children who have these issues, they would go to their parents, and their parents would have care and compassion and concern and get them help. But my parents were the ones directly profiting off of my exploitation, and then it behooved them to continue to repress and just keep me under control, even when it stopped, because I could literally blow up their entire lives. The actual sexual abuses stopped when I was around 8 years old. I was told from as far back as I can remember, oh, you don't remember anything before the age of 8. You don't have permanent memories before the age of 8. It was this constant brainwashing, gaslighting thing that they would do. One of the things my dad would always say is, I'm going to take y'all to Disney World, but not until, my sister's 2 years younger than I am, not until you're both 8, because you don't really have permanent memories before that age. And there was this constant refrain in my childhood of, you're not going to remember, you don't remember, none of the memories you'll have before this age are real. And so from as far back as I literally can remember, I was told I wasn't going to remember. I remembered that. I look back and I feel like my first act of rebellion was remembering. I did repress a lot of the nitty gritty of what happened. I would have the memories of right before and I would have the memories of right after, but there was always like that one puzzle piece missing in the middle of the actual abuse. But I never completely and totally didn't have the memories. They were always there, and they were, you know how Dorothy steps out of the door in The Wizard of Oz and she goes from black and white to Technicolor? In my mind, these dreams were way more vivid, way more detailed, way brighter and shinier in my brain than my regular memories. They stood out so much stronger. And even though I didn't have that last little puzzle piece in the middle, I always remembered that there was abuse and that that it was of a sexual nature. But my brain did the only trick that it could do to protect, this little girl, and it repressed it until I was old enough and safe enough in my life to process the memories appropriately and find healing. Yeah, it's amazing what our brains will do to protect us. It's also, I was so young. I was developing all of my neural pathways. My brain was growing and developing. And so it locked these little pieces of the puzzle away. I became horrible. I still am horrible at math, and music, of almost any kind of music, felt like nails on a chalkboard to me. So through my healing and therapy and time, I've come to realize that I stored these memories away in that part of my brain, the mathematical, musical section of my brain. And so when I would hear music, it would kind of brush up against those memories and I would start to feel uncomfortable. And so one of the first things that, when I started really digging into these traumas and doing the EMDR and doing the things, was having that realization that it wasn't that something was wrong with me, that I couldn't do the math and I didn't like math. It was, my brain was working the way God designed it, and it was protecting me until I was old enough and safe enough to be able to handle it. And so these memories were locked away in a safe place. And so that realization really lifted a lot of guilt and shame, because I felt like my brain was different than everybody's else. I felt like because I think differently, I was wrong somehow. But it was actually working how God planned for it to work, and it kept me safe until I was old enough to deal with what happened to me. For me, it stopped at around age 8. For my sister, it didn't stop for much, much longer. There was always something inside of myself that I felt that it was wrong, that it was ick, that it was uncomfortable. But for my sister, they got her to believe that this is what love is. So for my sister, she thought she was special and she was loved and she was important. So the abuse for her lasted a lot longer than it did for me, because just the way she broke very differently than I broke. And, she was able to convince herself that this is what love was. And I never was able to do that. It always felt like a violation. It always felt wrong. And so it isolated us from one another and kept us apart, which is what my parents wanted. Because if we were a united front, and then we would hold the power, because if we told what was happening to us, it would have stopped. So they kept us isolated from one another, emotionally. And even though we were in the same house growing up, we never shared or connected over it or talked about it. It wasn't something that happened. And while my abuses, the trafficking by my parents and the sexual abuse by my parents, stopped when I was 8, Physical abuse, emotional abuse, never stopped. And it never ceases to amaze me, the fact that predators are so very good at picking out their prey. And so a little girl who was alienated from her parents, had nobody who would believe her about what happened to her, who had already experienced horrific sexual abuses, was just ripe for a predator of a different kind to come along. So while my trafficking and abuses stopped at 8, the sexual abuses I suffered did not stop until adulthood, because other predators came around. What I survived is called childhood familial sex trafficking. As far as people who've been familial trafficked, I've only met one other person, and I know of one other person. I'm not saying that it's not happening, but what I am saying is those of us who have the freedom to speak out, who have the healing to speak out, who have the ability to do that, we're very few and far between. So our stories, they hit different, because people think sex trafficking and they think somebody got involved with drugs and then they met the wrong people, and that's what they assume happens when it comes to sex trafficking. And I think that that's why God has given me the strength and the ability to share my story, because my story is different than so many other people's story and so many other experiences. And I think that people need to understand that human trafficking isn't one thing where women make a bad choice and they end up trafficked in horrible situations. Human trafficking isn't like the movie Taken. Human trafficking isn't like Pretty Woman. Human trafficking is a little girl, 3.5-year-old girl, who's doing what her parents told her to do and earn the money for her sister's eye surgery. Human trafficking is a little girl who's paying off her dad's debts. Human trafficking is a lot of different things, and our stories they all have the same thing in common, that we've all been victimized, and we all suffer and need healing as a result of what happened to us. But our stories are so different and varied and vast that's why it's important to me to do this today, and it's also important to me to do the work that I do with Hands of Justice, and to tell my story whenever I can. There's a lot of shame. At our core, we're wired as human beings to seek our parents' approval, to seek their love, and to want that. So to get to the point of healing that where you don't need that, where you're able to be okay with who you are, where you are, have the freedom to tell your story, have the freedom to help others and not sit in shame and in the darkness. It takes a lot. And that's why it's so very rare for victims of familial trafficking to speak up ever. One of the reasons it's so important for me to be here today and to talk about this is, now I've been working with victims of sex trafficking for years now. And I was actually leading a support group for teenagers who'd been trafficked when I received a phone call on January 30th of 2023 that my sister had killed herself. My sister never got to where hope and healing is found. My sister never got to the good part where she gets to sit in a group of women and be there for them and hold space for them and support them and encourage them. My sister never got to where she could speak about what happened to her freely without guilt and shame. My sister never got that. And through the grace of God, I did. So I feel it's the calling on my life, and it's my purpose and my drive to continue to do this work, to continue to press in this area, even though the work is hard, it's brutal. It's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life is working with these women day in and day out, but it's the most beautiful thing I've ever done in my life. I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, I'm a wife, I'm an artist. I have a very full life, but this right here, the getting to press in and hold space for these women and help women like myself find healing and hope. This is the work of a lifetime. This is what I was made for. And it is so fulfilling and so beautiful. And my life verse is part of it talks about God will give us beauty for ashes. And this is it. This is me having my beauty from ashes moment where I lost my childhood. I lost my sense of safety. I lost so very much because of what happened to me. But my sister lost her life. And before she died, she suffered and struggled every single day. And she never got the healing that I have. And I can't take that for granted. Not for a single day, not for a single second. I have to be grateful. And I have to use it for a higher and greater purpose than myself. As far as criminal prosecution goes, there was nothing. I literally had nobody in my life to tell. It was that dirty little family secret that everybody knows, but nobody cares enough about to do anything. I had one grandmother and one aunt in my whole family, but they were very much controlled by everybody else. So I was literally brought up not knowing that this wasn't what happened to everybody. I didn't know that this was different. I didn't know that while I felt deep within my soul that this was wrong, I didn't have anybody else in my life that wasn't experiencing the same thing. All the little girls in my family were experiencing, if not trafficking, abuse. So I didn't have that knowledge. And in the state of Texas now, there is no statute of limitations for childhood sexual assault. However, it wasn't retroactive when they passed that law. So by the time I got to a place where I was healed enough to speak out and to even think about that, the statute of limitations had passed. There was nothing I could do. It's as if I'm standing up to my waist in the ocean, and I can stand and I can be strong and I can continue this fight, but there's constantly going to be that pull, that push, that things are going to try to knock me down. There's going to be triggers and there's going to be hard times and hard days. And so while I'm standing and I'm strong and I'm in this fight and I'm in it for other women, it's a lot of work internally. It's a lot of work and a lot of effort. And I have to stay on top of it every single day, because if I don't, then I'm going to get knocked over by those waves and it's going to become overwhelming to me. So I have to do a lot of internal processes every day. I have to do a lot of internal work. I go to therapy every other week. Do EMDR, sound therapy. It's called Safe and Sound Protocol. I do the work, and it's as if it is a part-time job. I have to do the work every day, or I will be overwhelmed and I will be dragged under. So I'm good. I'm in this fight and I'm doing well, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't take effort and it doesn't take energy and it doesn't take a toll, because it does. It's as if I was brought up speaking a foreign language, but the language I was taught was to repress my emotions, suppress my feelings, never really connect with people, and show them what was inside, because while the abuses did stop when I was 8 years old, the repression of my feelings, the repression of my trauma, the continued re-traumatization through the contempt and basically hatred that my parents displayed towards me, really, really kept me from even realizing that I wasn't the one who was somehow wrong, that I wasn't the one, there was something about me that caused this to happen, because that's how I was brought up and gaslit to believe. And so being able to break that cycle, being able to understand that I was 3.5. You know, people always talk when they hear about a woman being assaulted. What was she wearing? Where was she? Was she out late? Had she had anything to drink? People ask these ridiculous questions. I was 3.5 years old. I was in my house. I had a doll. I slept with a blankie with a little silk edge. I was a child. There was nothing that I could have done differently or changed. And I believe that's true for the vast amount of women who are sexually assaulted or raped. There was nothing they could do to stop it either, because a predator is going to prey on innocence. And it doesn't matter if you're a 3.5-year-old child who sleeps with a doll, or you're a college student who went out with her friends. Predators are going to find prey. And the college student can be safe and stay with friends and make sure she's never alone and all of that. To that degree, she can put into place some protections for herself. I had nothing. My parents were the ones that were supposed to protect me, and they were the ones that were preying upon me.